Task Force Kestrel died on a Tuesday. That was the official record. 41 ships, 6,000 crew, gone in 11 minutes, erased from every star chart, every memorial wall, every training manual used by the Earth Defense Fleet. The record said, engine failure. The record said a reactor cascade. The record was a lie, and only 3 men in the entire Sol system knew it. 10 years earlier, the newly formed Earth Defense Fleet had been invited to join the Vareth Concord, a coalition of 7 alien species holding the line against a hostile empire called the Dravani Swarm. Earth was young, unproven, hungry to prove itself among the stars. So when the Concord asked for volunteers to hold a supply corridor at the edge of Concord space, Earth said yes. Task Force Kestrel was sent to hold that corridor. 41 ships against what intelligence said was a modest Dravani raiding party. Intelligence was wrong, or intelligence was a trap. The raiding party was a full invasion fleet, 300 ships strong, and the moment Kestrel engaged, the Concord's central command severed the relay beacon that connected the corridor to the rest of Allied space. No warning, no retreat order, no reinforcements. The corridor simply stopped existing on Concord battle maps, and Kestrel stopped existing with it. Admiral Elena Cho screamed into a dead channel for 6 minutes before she understood what had happened. The Concord hadn't lost the signal. The Concord had cut it, deliberately. Kestrel wasn't a task force anymore. It was bait, thrown into the Dravani's path to buy the Concord's true fleet time to reposition somewhere far away, somewhere human ships would never be told about. Cho gave the order that saved what was left of her people. Not retreat. Disappear. 41 ships became 11. 11 ships ran dark, engines cold, weapons silent, drifting on momentum alone through a dead system the Dravani had already stripped for resources and abandoned. It had no name on any Concord chart. Cho's crew started calling it the Grave. 10 years passed. On Earth, Kestrel's sacrifice became legend. A tragic accident, 41 ships lost to a mechanical failure nobody could explain, 6,000 names read aloud every year at a memorial nobody questioned. Earth mourned. Earth moved on. Earth kept building its fleet, kept trusting the Concord that had thrown its people away like spent ammunition. And in the grave, in the freezing dark past the edge of every map, something had not died. A listening post on the far rim of Sol territory, an aging automated relay called Watchtower 9, built to catch faint signals bouncing off dead systems, picked up something at 0347 hours that made every alarm on the station scream at once. A signal. Buried under 10 years of static and decay, degraded almost past recognition, but unmistakably artificial, unmistakably human. It was an Earth Defense Fleet distress code, a code that had been retired the day Kestrel was declared destroyed. The station's junior analyst, a woman named Priya Anand, who had joined the fleet the same year Kestrel disappeared, stared at the readout until her coffee went cold. She ran the decryption 3 times because she refused to believe it the first 2. Then she sent it up the chain with a message that would end up rewriting fleet history. This isn't a ghost signal. Someone out there is still alive, and someone out there wants to be found. Nobody in command wanted to believe her. Because if Priya was right, it meant one of 2 things. Either the greatest tragedy in Earth Defense Fleet history had actually been a massacre nobody investigated, or someone out in the dark had spent 10 years learning exactly why they'd been left to die, and was finally ready to tell somebody. Command chose to send 1 ship to find out. Just 1. Quiet, deniable, expendable if it came to that. They had no idea what they were about to wake up. 300 light-years away, in a system with no name, a woman who used to be an admiral stood on the bridge of a ship that shouldn't exist. The hull plating was Dravani salvage welded over Earth Defense Fleet bones. The weapon systems were half human design, half reverse-engineered alien tech that had taken a decade to understand and rebuild. The crew who once wore Earth Defense Fleet uniforms now wore patchwork armor stitched from 3 different species scrap, and every single one of them remembered exactly who had left them to die. Elena Cho had spent 10 years turning 11 broken ships into something else entirely. Not a task force, not survivors. A weapon, sharpened in silence, waiting for exactly one thing, for someone to finally come looking. When her communications officer told her a Sol-based ship had picked up their beacon and was already inbound, Cho didn't celebrate. She didn't cry. She looked at the tactical display, at the fleet she had built from wreckage and grief, and 10 years of cold fury, and said 4 words that would define everything that came next. Let them see us. The scout ship Meridian dropped out of warp at the edge of the dead system, and every sensor operator on board went quiet at once. They had expected wreckage. A debris field maybe, or the cold husks of 11 ships drifting with no power and no life signs. A mystery to solve. A grave to finally mark on the charts. What they found instead made the captain order a full weapons-ready alert before anyone had said a single word. 11 ships arranged in a defensive formation so precise it could only be deliberate. Engines hot, weapons systems active, and above them, silent and enormous, a station built from the bones of at least 3 different starship hulls, its architecture belonging to no fleet in conquered space. Someone had built a fortress out here, and that fortress was still very much alive. The Meridian's captain, a cautious officer named Daniel Reyes, opened a channel and identified his ship using the oldest Earth Defense Fleet protocol he knew, the one taught to every recruit as ancient history. He didn't expect an answer. The answer came in a voice Earth had listed as killed in action 10 years earlier. "This is Admiral Elena Cho, Task Force Kestrel. You're late." Reyes had to sit down. What followed was not a rescue. It was an interrogation, and Cho was the one asking questions. She wanted to know if the Concorde still controlled Earth's fleet movements. She wanted to know if the corridor beacon cutoff had ever been investigated. She wanted to know coldly and precisely whether Earth still trusted the alliance that had erased 6,000 of its own people from the record without so much as an inquiry. Reyes didn't have good answers. He had a scout ship, a nervous crew, and the growing realization that the story he'd grown up with, a tragic accident, an unavoidable loss, was a lie built to protect an alliance Earth had never questioned. Cho invited him aboard, not as a guest, as a witness. What Reyes saw when he crossed onto Cho's flagship changed him permanently. Children born in the grave who had never seen Earth's sky. Engineers who had rebuilt warp cores from alien scrap with no manuals, no support, nothing but desperation and time. A memorial wall listing every name lost in the first year. Starvation, radiation sickness, one mutiny that Cho described in 4 flat words and refused to elaborate on further. And in the strategic command room, something that stopped Reyes cold. A wall of captured Dravani data, painstakingly translated over 10 years, detailing troop movements, supply routes, and, worst of all, internal Concorde communications, proving that the corridor abandonment had not been an accident of war. It had been a calculated sacrifice, approved at the highest levels of Concorde command, to protect systems belonging to older, more politically valuable member species. Humanity had been thrown away on purpose because humanity was, in the Concorde's own words, the most expendable asset available. Reyes transmitted everything back to Sol Command in a single encrypted burst, along with a message of his own. They're not survivors. They're an army, and they've been preparing for 10 years. Command needs to decide right now whether we're bringing them home, or whether we're afraid of what they'll do when they get there. Before Sol Command could answer, every sensor on the Meridian screamed a new warning. A Dravani Concorde joint patrol, 6 ships strong, had entered the dead system. They weren't investigating a rumor. They were hunting a leak. Cho's voice came over the Meridian's comms, calm in a way that made Reyes' skin crawl. They found out someone came looking for us. Now they're here to make sure nobody ever finds anything again. A pause. Captain Reyes, welcome to the grave. Buckle in. The Concord patrol commander expected a graveyard and a quiet cleanup. He got 11 warships that opened fire before he finished his opening hail. Cho's fleet moved like nothing Reyes had ever studied in any tactics course. No hesitation, no wasted maneuvers. 10 years of drills against imagined enemies had turned her crews into something closer to a single organism than 6 separate ships. The Dravani Concorde patrol, expecting an execution, found itself fighting for survival within 90 seconds. Reyes watched from the Meridian's bridge as Cho's flagship took a direct hit to its forward shields, and didn't even alter course. The hybrid armor, human alloy fused with Dravani plating, absorbed damage that should have crippled a ship half its age. Cho had built something out of scavenged hate that neither species had ever intended to exist. But the real weapon wasn't the ships, it was the information. Halfway through the engagement, Cho's communications officer broadcast something across every frequency the patrol was using. Not a threat, not a warning, but a recording. The actual voice of the Concord official who had authorized the corridor beacon cutoff 10 years earlier, admitting on record that Task Force Kestrel had been sacrificed to protect a Concord senator's homeworld from a diversionary strike that never even happened. The patrol commander's own crew heard it, and for just long enough their formation broke. Cho's fleet punched through the gap without mercy. 2 enemy ships crippled, 1 destroyed outright, the remaining 3 retreating in a scattered, undisciplined run that told Reyes everything about how thoroughly Cho's people had just shattered their confidence. It wasn't a battle. It was a decade of grief converted directly into violence, and it had taken less than 11 minutes. The same 11 minutes it had taken to destroy Kestrel a decade before. When the last enemy ship fled into warp, the bridge didn't erupt into celebration. It went silent, and Reyes understood why. This wasn't victory. This was the first receipt on a debt 10 years overdue. Cho turned to the open channel connecting her bridge to the Meridian. You wanted proof the Concord sold us out. You have it now, on every frequency they were using, heard by their own people. Her voice didn't waver. Take it back to Sol Command. Tell them Kestrel is alive, Kestrel has evidence, and Kestrel is done waiting quietly in the dark. Reyes transmitted the recording, the battle data, and Cho's message in a single burst back to Earth. The response from Sol Command took 4 minutes to arrive, and when it did, it wasn't from a fleet officer. It was from the Earth Defense Council itself, and it contained an order that would ignite the first true crisis Earth had faced since joining the Concord. Return immediately, and bring the survivors of Task Force Kestrel home. All of them, and everything they know. The Concord, it turned out, had intercepted the same recording, and the Concord had already decided that Task Force Kestrel would never be allowed to reach Earth alive. Sol System had never seen anything like the fleet that dropped out of warp at its outer marker. 11 battle-scarred ships, human and alien metal fused into something the Earth Defense Fleet's own engineers couldn't fully classify, flanked by the Meridian like a bodyguard escorting royalty nobody had invited to the palace. Every orbital sensor on Earth tracked their approach in silence, because nobody in command had decided yet whether Task Force Kestrel was coming home as heroes or as a problem to be contained. Elena Cho made the decision for them. She requested a live channel to the full Earth Defense Council, unencrypted, broadcast on public emergency frequencies that half the planet's civilian population could access. Command tried to block it. Cho's engineers, veterans of 10 years spent outsmarting Dravani jamming technology, made sure it went out anyway. For the first time, Earth heard the truth in real time. Cho didn't shout. She didn't perform grief. She simply laid out in flat and exhausted detail exactly how the Concord had used Earth's fleet as disposable bait, how the beacon cutoff had been an approved political decision, and how the engine failure story taught in every fleet academy for a decade had been manufactured to bury the truth alongside 6,000 names. Public reaction was immediate and furious. Politically, the Earth Defense Council fractured overnight. Half wanted to quietly smooth things over with the Concord to avoid destabilizing an alliance Earth's fleet still depended on for advanced technology access. Half wanted answers and wanted them loudly. Cho wasn't interested in either faction's comfort. She wanted the Concord officials responsible held accountable, and she wanted Earth to finally understand what kind of ally it had actually joined. While the political fallout consumed Sol Systems' news cycles, a quieter and far more dangerous conversation was happening in Concord space. The senator whose voice had condemned Task Force Kestrel on that recording now faced Concord-wide exposure and possible removal. He had exactly one solution left, and it wasn't diplomatic. He authorized a strike fleet, 3 times larger than the patrol Cho had already destroyed, to eliminate Task Force Kestrel before they could testify before the full Concord Council, and to ensure Earth's fleet took heavy enough losses in the process that no human government would ever again feel safe questioning Concord authority. Cho's intelligence network, built from a decade of intercepted Dravani Concord chatter, caught wind of the strike fleet's launch within hours. She brought the warning directly to the Earth Defense Council in person, standing in a chamber full of officials who 10 years earlier had accepted her death without asking a single question. They're not sending an apology fleet, Cho told them. They're sending an execution squad, and it's headed for Earth's own defense perimeter. You have 2 choices. Stand with us and fight the ones who threw us away, or stand aside and let them finish what they started 10 years ago. The council chamber went dead silent. Then the youngest council member present, a defense secretary who had lost a sibling aboard Task Force Kestrel, stood up first. "Sound the alert," she said. "All fleets, full mobilization. Earth doesn't run from its own people twice." The Concorde strike fleet arrived at Sol System's outer defense line expecting a quick, brutal lesson. What they found instead was Earth Defense Fleet's entire home guard, reinforced by Task Force Kestrel's 11 battle-hardened ships positioned at the exact choke point Cho had spent a decade studying in theory. The battle that followed would later be taught in every Earth Defense Fleet academy, as the moment humanity stopped being a junior partner in galactic politics and became something the rest of the stars had to reckon with. Cho's ships led the counterattack, not because they were the strongest, but because they were the only ones who had already fought this exact enemy and won. Reyes, now flying alongside Cho's flagship in a coordinated human battle line for the first time in a decade, watched her crews execute maneuvers that shouldn't have been possible from ships held together with salvage and stubbornness. The Concorde strike fleet had superior numbers. It did not have crews who had spent 10 years turning grief into precision. Every human ship in the defense line fought with the same information Cho had broadcast days earlier, the knowledge that their own alliance had tried to erase them, and the certainty that surrender meant a second betrayal. None of them intended to survive. Midway through the battle, the Concorde strike commander made the mistake that decided the entire engagement. He targeted Cho's flagship directly, believing that killing the woman who had exposed his senator's crime would collapse Earth's resistance. Cho's ship took catastrophic damage, its hybrid shields finally failing after absorbing more punishment than any single vessel should endure. She didn't retreat. She rammed her flagship's remaining forward batteries directly into the strike commander's lead cruiser at point-blank range, disabling its command systems in an explosion that lit up Sol System's outer defense line like a second sun. Leaderless, the remaining Concorde ships broke formation exactly as their earlier patrol had. Earth Defense Fleet's home guard, reinforced by 10 survivors of a task force the galaxy had written off as dead, pressed the advantage without hesitation. By the time the Concorde fleet retreated in full, humanity's home system had not just survived an execution attempt, it had annihilated the force sent to carry it out, and captured enough Concorde command data to expose the corridor betrayal to every species in the Alliance. Reyes found Cho's escape pod adrift near the wreckage of her flagship, badly injured but alive, still holding the data core containing 10 years of evidence. When he pulled her aboard the Meridian, she said only one thing before losing consciousness. "Tell them it's not over. Tell them we're going to their homeworld next, and this time we're not asking to be found. We're telling them we're coming." 3 months after the battle at Sol's defense line, a combined fleet unlike anything the galaxy had seen launched from Earth orbit, Earth Defense Fleet's newest warships flying beside the rebuilt remnants of Task Force Kestrel, their hybrid hulls now proudly displaying both human and Kestrel colors side by side. Their destination was the Concorde Senator's homeworld, the political heart of the Alliance that had once decided 6,000 human lives were an acceptable price for someone else's safety. Cho, recovered enough to stand on a bridge again, commanded the operation not for conquest but for something the Concorde itself had never offered her people. A reckoning conducted in full view of every species watching. The Senator's private defense fleet, weakened and demoralized after the failed strike on Sol System, could not hold the line. Cho's forces broke through the outer defense grid within hours, broadcasting the full data core of evidence to every Concorde world simultaneously as they advanced, proof of the corridor betrayal playing on public channels across the entire Alliance in real time. By the time the combined human fleet reached orbit, the Senator's own government had already turned against him, Concorde Council members demanding his immediate removal and formal charges for the deliberate sacrifice of an allied task force. Cho didn't need to fire a single shot at the planet itself. She simply held position in orbit, an undeniable symbol of the 6,000 names the Concorde had tried to erase, and waited for the Alliance to do what it should have done 10 years earlier. Justice came publicly and completely. The Senator was stripped of authority and handed over for Concorde-wide prosecution. Earth was granted full founding member status within the Alliance, a position of respect no human diplomat could have won through a decade of quiet cooperation. And Task Force Kestrel, 11 ships that the galaxy had once erased from every record, was formally reinstated into Earth Defense Fleet history, every one of the original 6,000 names read aloud again. this time with the full truth attached. Elena Cho stood on the bridge of her rebuilt flagship as the ceremony played across every human channel back home, watching a decade of engineered silence finally break into something the whole galaxy could hear. Rhea stood beside her, the same young captain who had once been sent alone to investigate a signal that shouldn't exist. 10 years, he said quietly. You spent 10 years waiting for someone to come looking. Cho watched the stars outside the viewport, the same dark expanse that had swallowed her people and given them back sharper, harder, and unbreakable. We didn't wait to be rescued, she said. We waited to be ready. There's a difference, and every species in this alliance just learned it the hard way. Far beyond Concord space and territory no human fleet had ever charted, the Dravani swarm was already receiving intelligence reports about a human battle fleet that had just humiliated one of the galaxy's oldest alliances without losing a single additional ship. For the first time in recorded history, an empire that had never once considered humanity a threat began drawing up contingency plans for exactly that possibility. The corridor that swallowed Task Force Kestrel had a name once again on every star chart in Concord space. This time, no one dared erase it.